The autumn rain had just stopped when James stepped off the bus into Millbrook, a village that seemed suspended in time. Moss-covered cottages lined winding roads, and ancient oak trees created a cathedral of branches overhead. He'd come here on impulse. His therapist suggested a retreat from the city, somewhere quiet to heal after his breakup. What he didn't expect was that the healing would involve magic. The riverside was modest but charming, run by an elderly couple who asked no questions and offered strong tea. That first evening, James walked through the village, noting the way locals exchanged knowing glances when tourists weren't looking. In the corner shop, he overheard two women whispering about the girl with the hood who came in every Thursday for supplies, always keeping her head down, always alone. His curiosity was sparked, the kind that comes from being a novelist, from needing stories. On Thursday, he positioned himself near the shop's window. When she arrived, he understood the mystery immediately. She wore a dark hoodie despite the mild weather, the drawstring pulled tight around her face, obscuring everything but her chin. She moved with an unusual grace, almost gliding rather than walking, and there was something about her that made the air around her seem shimmer slightly. Her name, he learned from casual conversation with the shopkeeper, was Riley. The next week, James contrived to be in the shop again. This time, he struck up conversation, commenting on the herbal tea selection, asking for recommendations. Riley hesitated, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft as wind through leaves. The chamomile, it helps with restlessness. He looked at her, at the hood still firmly in place, and felt inexplicably drawn to understand what she was hiding. Over the following weeks, James found excuses to encounter her. He left his apartment in the city. He extended his stay at the inn indefinitely. The locals began to recognize him, no longer treating him as a temporary tourist. He made a routine of walking past the forest cottage where Riley lived, sometimes stopping to sketch the ancient trees. One crisp October afternoon, as leaves turned gold and crimson, James finally worked up the courage to invite her for tea. To his surprise, Riley accepted, though her acceptance came with visible anxiety. They sat in a small cafe, and James asked her carefully about the village, about her life, about the forest that seemed to hold secrets in its depths. Riley was cautious, but gradually, as steaming cups of tea cooled between them, she began to open up. She talked about growing up differently, about feeling like she didn't belong in the normal world, about coming to Millbrook to find peace. She never mentioned her hood, and James didn't push. But he noticed things. The way her fingers trembled slightly when she held her cup, the way her eyes, a striking amber gold, flickered with intelligence and something ancient. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, her hood would slip just slightly, and he'd catch the barest hint of something soft and tawny at her ears. When she finally left that afternoon, James knew he was no longer interested in leaving Millbrook. The story he'd come here to escape had transformed into a mystery he was desperate to solve. November arrived with frost and burning leaves. James had rented a small cottage on the edge of Millbrook, claiming to his few remaining city friends that he was working on a novel. He was, in a way, though the main character kept stealing all his attention. His connection with Riley deepened slowly, like autumn itself deepening into winter. She began to lower her guard in increments. First, she'd meet him for coffee, without immediately making excuses to leave. Then she invited him to help her with repairs on her cottage, a sprawling, eccentric house surrounded by wild gardens that seemed to attract wildlife in unusual abundance. It was while helping her replace roof shingles that James first saw her without the hood. She'd been reaching for shingles on a high shelf, her hood falling back, and for a moment she froze. Her ears, and they were unmistakably ears, furry and pointed, fox-like in their delicate perfection, were fully visible in the afternoon sunlight. They were a warm russet color with creamy inner curves, twitching slightly with her anxiety. James simply smiled. "Beautiful," he said. Riley went rigid, ready to bolt, but he caught her hand gently. "Riley, I don't care. I don't care what you are. I care about you." She trembled, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, deliberately, Riley removed her hood entirely. Her hair fell loose, luxurious and thick, with undertones of copper and amber that matched those impossible ears. Her face, fully revealed, was ethereal, with sharp cheekbones and those mesmerizing golden eyes that seemed to hold ancient knowledge. "You're insane," she whispered. "Possibly," James agreed, "but I'm honest." That evening, they sat on her cottage porch as darkness fell. Riley told him everything about her family, who had retreated to the forest generations ago, about her gifts with nature and animals, about the loneliness of being unable to fit into either world. She spoke of shapeshifters and forest magic, of the modern world's inability to accept what it couldn't understand. James listened without interruption, and when she finished, he reached over and gently touched one of her ears. They twitched at the contact, and Riley closed her eyes, leaning into his touch like a cat. "Stay with me," he said. "Not just a night. Here, in Millbrook, in this life we could build." "It's not that simple," Riley replied, but her hand was already finding his, their fingers intertwining. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. That night, they explored each other with wonder and care. In the soft light of her cottage, James discovered every secret her body held. The sensitive points where her ears emerged from her head, the way her collarbone caught the light, the strength beneath her delicate frame. Riley undressed him with hesitant reverence, touching him as if she'd always wanted to but never dared. They made love slowly, reverently, her small cries echoing to the cottage as he moved inside her. She was exquisitely sensitive, responsive to every touch, every whispered word of affection. When they lay tangled together afterward, Riley's ears were no longer hidden, pressed flat against her head in contentment, occasionally twitching with pleasure. "I love you," James said into her hair, surprising himself at the truth of it. Riley turned to face him, those golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "I love you, too. I think I have since you first smiled at me in the shop." They held each other through the night, and for the first time since arriving in Millbrook, James felt the weight he'd been carrying since his divorce begin to lift. But in the distance, through the cottage windows, something moved in the forest, something large and watchful. Winter deepened, and James and Riley became inseparable. He moved into her cottage officially, though he kept paying rent on his own place, a concession to the need to maintain some normalcy. They fell into a rhythm. Mornings spent working, he on his novel, she on her artwork. Intricate paintings of forest scenes that captured something ineffable about nature's magic. Afternoons in the village or exploring the woods surrounding their home. Evenings tangled together in bed or by the fireplace. But as December arrived, Riley grew increasingly restless. She would disappear into forest for hours, and when she returned, her clothes would be covered in frost, her eyes gleaming with something wild and untamed. When James asked where she went, she would only smile mysteriously. "The forest is calling the pack," she finally admitted one night, as snow began falling outside their bedroom window. "They want to meet you." "The pack." James sat up, processing this. "Your family." "My family, yes, but also others. Creatures like me and others less like me. The forest has a life that most humans never perceive, James. I need to introduce you to it. I need them to understand that you're not a threat, that you're mine." The possessiveness in her tone should have alarmed him. Instead, it thrilled him. The meeting was arranged for winter solstice, the longest night. Riley prepared him all week, explaining what to expect, teaching him the protocols of forest magic. She also took him to bed frequently, as if trying to mark him with her scent, her presence, her claim on him. When solstice night arrived, Riley dressed him in clothes she prepared. Soft leather, earth-tone layers that seemed designed for both warmth and movement. She dressed herself in a flowing brown dress that hugged her curves, her ears fully exposed, her hood abandoned. She looked otherworldly in the candlelight of their cottage. "Are you ready?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. The forest at night was nothing like the forest in daylight. Bioluminescent plants lit their path in soft blues and greens. The air felt thick with presence and power. Animals watched them from the shadows, not threatening, but intensely aware. In a clearing lit by moonlight and strange, glowing mosses, they waited. Then, one by one, shapes emerged from the darkness. Some were humanoid like Riley, with animal features, a wolf man with silver fur and primal grace, a deer woman with antlers of bone and intention, a figure that seemed to shift between forms. Others were more purely animal, wolves whose eyes held intelligence, foxes that walked on hind legs, and creatures James had no names for. Riley stepped forward, pulling James with her. "This is James," she announced, her voice carrying an authority he'd never heard before. "He is my mate. The forest will accept him, or I will leave." The declaration stunned him. She hadn't told him she considered him her mate. Though, perhaps in the language of the forest, that's what making love night after night meant. The wolf man, who introduced himself as Devon, Riley's uncle, studied James intently. "You would give up your human life? Your world?" James looked at Riley, at the way the moonlight caught her eyes, at the vulnerability and hope in her expression despite her authoritative stance. "I already have," he said honestly. What happened next was part ritual, part celebration. The creatures of the forest welcomed him with strange ceremonies, drinking from a cup of herbal wine that tasted of earth and starlight, walking a pattern to the clearing while they chanted in a language that predated words, placing their hands and paws on his shoulders in acknowledgement. And when it was over, Riley pulled him aside, away from the others, into a shadowed copse of ancient trees. She dropped to her knees before him, and for a moment James thought something was wrong. Instead, she tugged open his shirt, leaning down to kiss his chest, his shoulders, his neck, leaving small marks, claiming in a way that felt primal and necessary. "Mine," she murmured against the skin. "You're mine now, not just in love, but in magic, in the forest's eyes, in our kind's understanding." She pulled him down onto the soft moss and needles of the forest floor, her movements urgent and passionate. They made love there, surrounded by watchful eyes that were now witnesses to a bond that transcended human understanding. When she came, she cried out his name, and it echoed through the forest like a benediction. Afterward, as they lay tangled together under a blanket of stars visible only to them, James realized he had stepped across a threshold from which he couldn't return. He wasn't entirely human anymore, not in the way that mattered. He belonged to the forest now, to Riley, to magic, and he'd never been happier. Christmas came and went in Millbrook with quiet contentment. James's novel progressed, fed by the reality of living in a world where magic was real. Riley's artwork blossomed into something extraordinary, as if her confidence in herself and in their relationship unlocked new depths of creativity. But in January, when Riley took a pregnancy test behind the bathroom door of their cottage, everything shifted again. She stared at the 2 pink lines for a long moment, her hands shaking. They'd used protection, of course they had. But Riley had mentioned once, in passing, that magic sometimes had its own agenda. She hadn't thought seriously about what that meant until now. James was in his study when she found him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "We're having a baby," she said quietly. He spun to face her, his expression cycling rapidly through shock, wonder, and something that looked dangerously like tears. Are you certain? Are you okay? Is the baby?" "Everything's fine," Riley assured him, though her own voice trembled with uncertainty. "But James, you need to understand what this means. Our child will be half human, half forest folk. It will have abilities we can barely imagine. The forest magic runs deep in our bloodline and mixed with human genetics. It'll be extraordinary," James finished, pulling her close. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of pine and night jasmine that always clung to her. "Like you." But the pregnancy brought unexpected complications. As Riley's belly began to swell with their child, other forest creatures became possessive and protective in ways that sometimes border on oppressive. Devon began appearing regularly, checking on Riley's health, making recommendations about her diet and movement. The elder of the pack, a massive wolf woman named Sage, insisted on overseeing Riley's preparation for birth. More surprisingly, James found himself becoming territorial in return. When other males came around, even in their animal forms, jealousy flared hot and primal in his chest. He'd catch himself growing angry, aggressive in ways he never had before. The forest magic was changing him too, he realized, awakening instincts he'd never accessed in his purely human life. One evening in March, with Riley 6 months pregnant and glowing in a way that made James unable to keep his hands off her, a stranger arrived in Millbrook. He called himself Marcus and claimed to be a journalist doing research on small English villages for a travel magazine. James didn't believe him for a moment. Neither did Riley. "He's tracking us," she said quietly, after seeing Marcus buying supplies in the village shop. "I can feel it. He knows what we are." It turned out that Marcus was a hunter of sorts. Not a poacher, but a researcher for an underground organization that tracked and documented magical creatures. He wasn't violent, but he was relentless in his pursuit of truth. He began asking questions, following James around the village, trying to get him drunk at the pub to extract information. The night Marcus followed James into the forest, a grave mistake. Things escalated quickly. James found himself shifting, changing in ways he hadn't known he could. His limbs strengthened, his senses sharpened, his vision turned to thermal imaging. It was a full transformation like the purebloods could achieve, but it was more than enough. He cornered Marcus against an ancient oak, his newly bestial features causing the man to go pale with terror. "You leave," James growled, "and you never come back. You tell no one. You forget you were ever here. And if I ever find out you've spoken a word of this to anyone, I will hunt you down, and I will make sure you understand why that's a terrible idea." Marcus ran. He was out of Millbrook within the hour. When James made it back to the cottage, Riley was waiting by the window, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of fear, but of something else, desire, pride, attraction. When he climbed through the window, still half-shifted, she pulled him toward the bedroom. "That was so hot," she whispered, pressing kisses to his transformed features, running her hands over fur that had emerged along his arms. "You're my protector, my love, the father of our child." They made love carefully, conscious of the baby between them, but no less intensely. James marveled at the changes in her body, the fullness of her breasts, the roundness of her belly, the way her scent had deepened and intensified. She was more beautiful to him than ever. As he moved inside her, Riley's ears flattened against her head, her small cries becoming almost animal in their intensity. "I love you," she gasped. "I love us. I love our family." Later, as they lay in the darkness, James's human form had returned, though certain parts of him remained transformed, a lingering evidence of what he could become. Riley traced the residual marks on his skin, where fur still grew in patterns it hadn't before. "You're changing," she said softly. "The forest is claiming you more and more. By the time the baby is born, you won't be entirely human anymore." "Is that a problem?" James asked, though he knew the answer already. "No," Riley breathed. "It's perfect. Now you'll truly be mine, truly part of the forest, truly family." She took him into her mouth as she said it, and James lost himself in the sensation of being wanted, needed, claimed by the woman he loved with every fiber of his transformed being. May arrived in an explosion of greenery and blooming flowers. The forest surrounding Millbrook had never been more alive, and Riley swore it was because her magic, amplified by pregnancy, was calling to every growing thing. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in years suddenly opened. Trees that had been dying began to flourish. The village itself seemed to glow with an otherworldly quality. James was transformed now, more forest folk than human. His senses operated on a level most people would find incomprehensible. He could smell emotions, could track Riley's cycle as surely as the moon tracked the tides, could feel the forest energy pulsing through his veins like a second heartbeat. He'd given notice to his flat in London, withdrawn his savings, and committed fully to building a life here. He'd also finished his novel, a thinly veiled account of his own experiences, which he had no intention of publishing under his real name. Riley went into labor on the spring equinox, as if the baby understood the significance of balanced nights and days. The birth took place at home, in the cottage they'd made theirs, with Sage and 2 other forest folk midwives attending. James stayed with her, holding her through contractions, murmuring endearments and encouragement. It was the most intimate experience of his life, watching Riley's body do the miraculous work of bringing their child into the world, seeing her strength and resilience pushed to absolute limits, being present for the moment their daughter arrived, slick and squirming and absolutely perfect, with tiny ears that folded perfectly against her skull and eyes that opened gold and knowing. "Hello, Eleanor," Riley sobbed, cradling their daughter. "Hello, my beautiful girl. Welcome home." They'd chosen a name together, Eleanor, which meant bright light. Seemed perfect for a child born of magic and love, of two worlds coming together. James found himself crying as he looked at their daughter, at Riley holding her, at the visible magic that seemed to shimmer around them, literally. The air around the three of them sparkled with possibility and ancient forest power. The celebrations that followed were unlike anything James had experienced. The forest creatures came, leaving gifts of enchanted objects, blessed herbs, and promises of protection. The village people, who had somehow understood without being told that something momentous had happened, left flowers and gifts on their doorstep, as if they understood on a cellular level that magic had entered their world. But the true intimacy came after, when Sage and the other midwives had left, and it was just James, Riley, and Eleanor. Riley was recovering quickly. The magic in her blood accelerated her healing, and one evening, 2 weeks after Eleanor's birth, she pulled James into bed. She was still nursing Eleanor during the day, her breasts full and sensitive, and James found himself fascinated by this new aspect of his wife's body and function. "I need you," Riley whispered, positioning Eleanor in her bassinet where she could feed from a bottle of express milk. "I need to feel alive as a woman again, not just a mother." James approached her tenderly, carefully checking that she wasn't in pain. But Riley was insistent, guiding him, showing him how to touch her, how to move. It was different than before, slower, more reverent perhaps, but no less passionate. She came easily, her body still flooded with hormones and emotion, and when James followed her over, he did so with the knowledge that this wasn't just about pleasure or claiming. This was about renewal, about confirming their bond, reaffirming the choice they'd both made to build a life together. Afterward, as they lay together with Eleanor sleeping peacefully between them, James looked at his wife and daughter and felt something settle into his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but something deeper. Completion. Belonging. "Tell me about the future," Riley said softly, her fingers intertwined with his. "Not the far future, just tomorrow, next week, next month. Tell me about the life we're building." "Tomorrow, we take Eleanor outside for the first time," James said, painting the picture with his words. "The forest will feel her magic, and every creature will know that a new guardian has been born. Next week, we register her birth. We decided to tell the authorities that she was born abroad, which explains her unusual appearance. Next month, you'll teach her the first words in the old language, and she'll speak to the trees before she speaks to us." "And you?" Riley prompted. "What about you?" "I'm going to finish becoming what I was always meant to be," James said. "A bridge between worlds. A guardian of magic. A father. A husband." He paused and added, "I'm going to be happy." Riley smiled, and in that smile was everything they'd overcome, his skepticism, her fear, their mutual vulnerability, the magic that had transformed them both. She leaned over Eleanor's sleeping form to kiss him, and in that kiss was a promise that they would face whatever came next together, that their love was stronger than any force that might test it, that their daughter would grow up knowing magic was real, because her parents would be living proof. Outside, the forest sang with the magic of new life, ancient power mixing with human love, creating something entirely unprecedented. In Millbrook, the trees swayed though there was no wind, and flowers bloomed at midnight, and for those few hours when the spring equinox still held sway, anything seemed possible. And in a small cottage on the edge of an enchanted forest, a family, half human, half magical, entirely bound by love, slept in peaceful contentment, ready for whatever adventures the future would bring.